message. Perfect. So tonight's talk on the marine world is going to be given by Frances Dipper. She's an independent diving marine biologist and author of many books on marine natural history, and they're written for a really wide range of audiences: children, adults, and students, basically anyone with an interest in the ocean. There's a number of them that have come out fairly recently. So there've been guides to marine fishes, a book in the RSPB Spotlight series on seals, and the marine world, which came out with a revised reprint in 2019. And she does actually feature in one of our newsletters as well. So I've got an article, an interview with her in one of our newsletters. So that's real fame for you. So I'm going to hand you over now to Frances for what's going to be a fascinating talk. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll get ready for her to share hers. Over to you, Frances.
Right, okay, well, I'll just press the share screen button and then find the talk and then do the other bits. Just waiting for that top bit to go away so I can start the slideshow. Sorry, there's a thing blocking up the top at the moment to do with Zoom, which means I can't get at my. Hang on, I'll just try something else.
Yeah, just hover over it. Maybe it will.
I'll be there in a minute. Slideshow. That thing, get rid of that. There we are. Right, I've managed to get rid of that.
We can see your screen fine. It's just setting up.
It's just a matter of finding the slideshow now. Yep. So from the beginning. Right. So hopefully now you can all see the first slide.
Yep, it's perfect.
Excellent. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all very much indeed for inviting me to talk to you tonight. It's only my second ever talk online, because usually I'm jumping around in front of the audience. So I will do my very best with the technology. The marine world is the most amazing place. It's something I've wanted to and have been involved with almost all my life. And it's an enormous subject. Most of you will be familiar with a slide like this, the world, showing it from space, showing just how vast that marine part of it is, over 2/3 of the entire planet. And that won't be new to most of you. But I particularly love this photograph because it's a real one taken from the Apollo rather than lots stitched together. All those years ago in 1972, so that's 50 years or so, a bit more ago, that we were able to see the marine world in all its glory. So I've been involved in it for most of my life, as I say, both on the shore, so keeping either dry or damp, but also underwater as a diving biologist, doing things like coral reef surveys. And here we're measuring corals in the Saba, and just a lot of survey work over the years. And that means I've seen the most incredible variety of marine life. And it never ceases to amaze me. Everything from tiny things like this sea spider. And how come a tiny sea spider the size of your thumbnail has all this colour? It's just astonishing. This was taken by somebody I've never met, but she was very helpful to me when I was doing the marine world. And it's the most fabulous photograph I've ever seen of a sea spider. Of course, there are the larger things as well, the whales, the dolphins, the seals, the big stuff, beautifully showcased by people like David Attenborough. But this life just shows up. This photograph is just on our way to the Staffa archipelago in the Hebrides. And this bottlenose dolphin just appeared and just led us to where we were going to. It just happens. It's amazing. Now, most of you will be well aware that there are huge problems associated with our oceans today. Pollution, climate change, ocean acidification, global warming, and so on. And it's very hard nowadays to find a pristine beach. This is about as good as you get in Australia, in the very south. with just one piece of litter, and that piece of litter being quite useful and acting as a connection for these goose barnacles. But it's not those aspects of the marine world I want to talk to you about tonight. They are vitally important. We all need to be aware of them. But I really want to showcase tonight and to let you look through a window at the marine world. So it's obviously not just one habitat, it's an enormous space, and we're only going to have time to just graze the very surface of it tonight. Otherwise, it's like trying to give a talk on everything else in the world on land. So we're going to be very much here up at the top, the surface waters, perhaps the top 50 meters or so. But I am going to take you down into the depths, virtually at least, down into the darkness, because nowadays there are many, many wonderful photographs that are freely available to people. And so I thought we'd go for a little journey down that far as well. And we'll have a look at things like this amazing stone crab, which was living, I think it was 1,000 meters down on the mid-Atlantic ridge. I've never been in a submersible and never will, but it's an amazing thing to do, I believe. It's also worth remembering that there is a past to the ocean as well as the present. And the fossils, particularly around the UK, which is the only place I've looked for them, are astonishing. One of my favourite being in your Natural History Museum in London, the one collected by Mary Anning of this incredible animal. And it's a place that she found it is down in Lyme Regis in Dorset, a place that was actually where I spent most of my childhood holidays. And it's an astonishing area, the Jurassic Coast, as they call it now. And even the lampposts have got ammonites on them. And so it's well worth looking out for marine fossils as part of your natural history searches. One, for example, I found, probably I should think 50 years ago, literally picking up a piece of rock that looked likely, giving it a tap with a hammer and opening it up, and there was this magical ammonite just hidden in the middle. And nowadays, of course, everybody does go down and do it, but in those days there was virtually nobody on the beaches collecting fossils. So do think about the past of the ocean as well as the present. But also, of course, the future. And this photograph, I think, shows what we need for the future of the oceans. And that is getting young people, students, children, anybody interested in the ocean so that they're aware of a lot of the programs and problems that are happening. So I think we'll set off on our journey underwater. But before we do, I want you to take a look at this sandcastle. Now, I spent last week with my grandchildren building sandcastles on the beach, but none of us managed to complete something quite this amazing. And just bear that in your head until we get to the end of the talk. And then I'm going to ask if anybody knows, without looking it up on the internet, whether you can tell me what sort of animal actually made this amazing structure underwater. Now, whoops, we've got stuck now, nothing's happening. Technology, I'm not getting this slide to move on.
I'm not sure. It should be on.
It's been working.
Yeah. Are you clicking the arrow keys?
Yes, I'm using the arrow keys at the moment.
Can you move back? Can you go back?
No, I can't go back either. I wonder if it's the streaming. I wonder if it's
It shouldn't be the streaming. It shouldn't have any impact. Are you using a PC or a Mac?
It's a laptop.
Right. Is it Windows or?
Yeah, it'll be Windows. Yes, it's Windows. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Maria, do you know where the other buttons are on the Windows version of PowerPoint?
They normally come down, I normally get them down on the sort of left, bottom left. That's normally where my controls are. What we can do is we can possibly come out and restart, just in case it's something, you know, just something that will kind of sort itself out with you know, just kind of do it again. So maybe, yeah, so someone's suggesting moving this cursor onto the screen. And
Right.
then it's fine because it's
Okay.
giving people time to have a look at the kind of the image as well. I figure I like the way that people are adding all their ideas in. So carry on with that for a few minutes. And then you could, do you want to just try clicking return? Pressing your return button, see if anything happens.
No, nothing happens. No.
Okay, so shall we stop share? Basically, stop sharing and let's just try restarting.
And restart the, yeah.
Okay, right, stop there. Yeah. Apologies for this. It's not something I've come across before.
No, we actually haven't had it before either, so interesting. So yeah, so then if you just try sharing again, maybe just from that screen.
So go from that screen. Yeah. Right, let's see if that will now move on. Nope, nothing happening. This is very frustrating. I'm going to stop sharing again.
Yeah, move and maybe move on to the next. Can you move on to the next slide in your actual, just on your presentation? Is it letting you move?
No, it's not letting me do anything at all at the moment. I'm going to minimize your screen, your thing. Right, now I'm going to try escape. Right, now I can now move on. I'm going to see if I can move on from there. Hold on a minute.
Okay, Shona's just right.
Well, I'm just going to try. Yep, go on.
Shona's just said about making sure your numbers lock hasn't been accidentally switched on. That's not a trick I knew, so just kind of keep an eye on that.
I don't know what a numbers log is even, but anyway. Right.
Yeah,
okay.
it would. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, what do you think what you're planning to do? Do you think?
Right. I'm going to go start the slideshow again. I'm just going to go to where you are. Right. Now I'm just going to share again if I can.
Yep, Beverly, that's what I was wondering, but let's see if we can get it to work without that, and then if necessary, we can go for a reason.
I can't even find you guys now, I'm afraid.
Okay.
And again. Right, so forget all that, everybody. That didn't happen, okay?
Yeah, but I'm glad you occupied yourself by looking at the photo and then I'm putting in your ideas, though. So thank you. Yeah, okay, back to you now, Francis. That's great.
Right, cross your fingers, everybody. So we're going to start off slightly inland, the coastline above the cliffs, because the sea's influence actually extends a long way inland, the maritime influence. So the salt spray is going to affect all the things growing along the coastline, as well as the seashore and deeper. So you're going to get specific plants adapted to saltiness. I went across to the west coast of Ireland for just 2-3 years ago and was astonished to see what I thought were daisies growing right down on the shore. But of course, this again is an adapted plant, a sea mayweed related to the daisy family of daisies, but adapted by having special leaves so you don't lose moisture and so on. So you've got that salty influence quite a long way inland. And as another example of that, this is one of my favourite. This is the yellow-horned poppy taken up on the Norfolk coast here. And you can see it just grows on shingle with virtually no soil at all. And I love it because it's got the longest seed pods of, I think, any flowering plant in the UK. And then it explosively sends its seeds out when these pods ripen. So you've got marine influence right up onto the coastline. But let's move down onto the seashore. In UK, we've got more than 11,000 miles of coastline, counting all the indents. which gives us scope for a huge variety of different types, everything from mud and sand, rock, boulders, pebbles, cobbles, and so on. And on a good low tide, like this is a spring tide here up near Mull, where we were doing some work, on a good low tide, you can get an amazing depth, if you like, of shoreline exposed. And we get everything, as I said, from mud and sand to steep cliffs like the White Cliffs of Dover, which is very near to there, with rocks and boulders below and cliffs above, right through to the sands and muds. But I thought we'd start with some sand, but in this case, move to Australia. I don't know if we've got anybody from Australia today with us, but this is up in the very northern part of Australia, northeast. And we're on a sandy beach, and when the tide has gone down, there's absolutely nothing except flat sand. But as you wait and watch, lots of little bubbles start to appear on the sand. And if you look closely, you can see they've got structure to them, and you can tell the size because you've got my big toe there. And if we move in even closer, then you'll see each patch of bubbles on the sand has a hole in the middle. And if you stand still for long enough, then out of that hole will appear a tiny, tiny, tiny crab. And these are called sand bubbler crabs. And within hours, they can cover the entire beach with these bubbles of sand. And this is a particular type called a soldier crab. And what they're doing is they're sifting the sand with those big claws and extracting the edible bits and then moulding it into these tiny little balls, which they then discard. Hence, I suppose, the name sea bubbler. I think they're absolutely magic. They can turn a flat sand beach into a bubbled sand beach in just a very, very few hours. Rocky shores are a bit of a different concept. Here we've got a group from something I belong to called the Porcupine Marine Natural History Society, doing a survey, looking under boulders, looking under the seaweeds and searching for animals, including some of my favourites, which are the fish, the seashore fish. And this is one of my overall favourites, a butterfish, so called because they have no scales, and that enables them to wriggle between the rocks from pool to pool with much more easily and makes them extremely slippery, hence the name butterfish. So I want to move on just to talk about 2 or 3 examples of rocky shore animals in the UK, because whilst they might be very common, have some very fascinating biology to them. So here we have a limpet. I'm sure you'll recognise a limpet. And I always thought limpets were rather boring, but they're not. It turns out they have a home range. When the tide's in, they will crawl away to up to a metre, something like that. And then every time that the tide goes out again, they crawl back quietly to their home spot and settle there. And you can see that by doing this, they're wearing away a little spot for themselves, which their shell fits exactly so that no water escapes from under them when the tide is out. So they've got a home range, they can sense where they are, they know what they're doing, and so on. They also, strangely, have something in common with a great white shark. Now, a great white shark's got amazingly strong jaws and teeth and can chomp down on practically anything. And yet their teeth are not as strong as a limpet's teeth. And a limpet, they've worked out that the limpet's teeth, which look a little bit like a cheese grater, the limpet's teeth have the strongest absolute tensile strength of any known marine animal, if what I'm reading is correct. But nevertheless, whether it is or not, they've got very, very hard material in their teeth, and they use that simply to crawl over the rocks and scrape off gunk. So you can see here the feeding trail of a limpet, and it's just gone along scraping little bits of seaweed and bacterial film and so on off the rock. And that can have a huge influence because they can scrape away all the spoilings of the seaweeds and actually keep the vegetation in check, rather as a rabbit does in a forest. But the only bit they can't reach is their own top of the shell. They can't scratch their own backs. So you'll often find limpets on bare rock where they've eaten all the vegetation, but they've got seaweeds on their back. Barnacles are another rather boring looking animal, but again, they've got a fascinating life. They are actually crustaceans, so they're related to crabs, shrimps, and so on. And they start life in the plankton as a tiny little floating planktonic animal. And when they eventually settle down, they do so on their head, and they glue their head to the rock with their feet up in the water. They build this shell around themselves. And then when the tide is in, they open these sliding doors you can see at the top there, and they stick their feet out. Not their hands, but their feet. So where that red arrow is, you can see the feet, or cirri, as they're called. And these literally comb the water like a hand, catching all those little planktonic bits of food that are floating about. So it's a fairly static lifestyle. But one of the problems is that they are fixed to a rock. Once they're fixed, they cannot move. So they can't go off and find a mate, which could be a problem, except that if there's a neighbouring barnacle, then your neighbour can send out the longest willy in the marine world. Actually, I'm not quite sure if that's true, but it's got a very long one in relation to its body, and it will reach over to fertilise the adjacent barnacle, which is fairly amazing. And one of my friends captured this moment with his camera, which I think is astonishing. If you want to see it for yourself, this is what you have to do. Lean down on a pontoon and peer into the water on a nice, calm, quiet day, and you'll very often see barnacles at least feeding, if not mating. You'll get some very funny looks, but it's actually a surprisingly effective way of seeing some unusual marine life. The seashore, especially rocky seashores, are particularly difficult places to live. You've got, in the winter, you've got snow, in the summer, you've got hot sun, you've got rain, you've got the tide going in and out twice a day, and you wouldn't expect it to be where you'd find a nice soft-bodied anemone. But there are one or two that are really, really well adapted to the seashore life. And this is one of them, the beadlet. And it exists as a blob of jelly on the rock when the tide's out, and then magically opens up when the tide comes in into this very beautiful flower-like animal. And even though it's just a soft-bodied anemone, it's a pretty tough cookie, because I've put a little white arrow up on the right there, and that's showing you these blue beads around the edge, which are actually the reason it's called a beadlet anemone. And they are concentrations of stinging cells. And if another anemone settles out of the plankton near to it and grows, or even shuffles across closer to it, which they can do, then they will fight each other with these beads, which produce extra long, strong, powerful stings. So it's a bit of a fighting machine, even though it looks just like a blob of jelly. Of course, there are much larger animals using the seashore, and we were lucky enough to come across this fur seal in New Zealand a few years ago, because seals, walruses, all these related pinnipeds, they need to come out on the shore to rest, to digest their food, and of course to have their young. So the seashore can be home to some very, very much larger, more obvious animals as well. So we've had a quick look at the coastal area, the maritime area. We've had a very quick look at some sand and some rocky shores. And we'll move on now to our third habitat, the open ocean. This is the water starting at the shoreline, going all the way right out to the central oceans, from the very shallows down to the deep. And it's an absolutely fascinating habitat. This is Sepadan Island in Malaysia, where I went diving and doing surveys a number of years ago. And if you step off the shore just a few meters in, you are then hanging over a cliff which is 600 meters down to the seabed. You can then move away from that cliff until you can't see it anymore, and you find yourself dangling in a completely alien world. No bottom visible, no surface visible, no side visible, just a completely open, empty space. And that's where many marine animals spend their entire lives, with no walls, no floor, no ceiling. This is one of them, but in fact, this is actually an aquarium in Denmark. And this is the world's heaviest, not biggest, but heaviest bony fish. It's given various names, moonfish, sort of, and various others. Sunfish is a common name because it's often found sunbathing, if you like, up near the surface, although it's probably not sunbathing, but it's often found lying on its side at the surface. But you can see it simply by jumping on a ferry, somewhere like going from, say, the southwest of UK over to the Isles of Scilly, and the ferries very often spot these animals just near the surface. And they are absolutely massive in terms of weight. Not quite as large, though, of course, as the biggest fish in the ocean, which is the whale shark. And here we're on Ningaloo Reef on the west coast of Australia. And I got the chance to snorkel with these about 3 years ago. They are the most incredible animals. I knew how big they were, but I was totally stunned, basically, by these things. And what I really like is that nowadays everybody here, anybody who can go and see one and photograph one from the side like this, can contribute to citizen science, because there's a project which identifies individuals from their spots and puts them onto a database, and they can then trace where these animals are moving to by when they get photographs again of the same animal from somewhere else, which is amazing. This one got a bit fed up of us, and it made its feelings known by letting loose a certain amount of whale shark poo. But interestingly, that too could be useful. And I learned the other day that actual whales, produce very oily poos that float. And so they've now got a system where they actually go out in boats and collect this stuff for DNA analysis. And they've even got sniffer dogs that are trained to sniff out from the front of a boat and find the poo so that they can scoop it up. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. How large are they? Well, if you've been sitting in your seat too long and you get up in whichever room you're in and you walk from one side to the other, I would say that the majority of you wouldn't even be as long as this young whale shark. And this young whale shark was 4 meters long. 10 meters is a normal adult size for a whale shark. And there are recorded, albeit not actually scientifically documented, records of very much bigger 15-meter, possibly even 20-meter whale sharks, as big as many of the big whales. So they are a very large animal, but of course they feed entirely on plankton because they are filter feeders. Now I'm going to have to go on a bit faster than this because we're getting behind. Okay, so whales, another large animal, very large animals that live up in the open ocean. My only large whale that I've ever seen is this sperm whale in New Zealand. And it came to the surface of the boat, next to the boat we were watching from, and it stayed up having a few breaths before doing the beautifully classic thing of lifting its tail fluke and diving back down into the 1,000-meter deep canyon in which it would have been hunting for its food. A truly amazing sight. And again, you can identify individuals, in this case from the markings along the edges of the tail. How do you go about finding a whale like that? Well, it's perfectly obvious. You go to a whaleway station. I couldn't resist that one. What they were doing around that part of the coastline in New Zealand is they were diving down into the canyons to look for these animals. This is a colossal squid, not a giant squid, but a colossal squid, the heaviest and second largest squid in the ocean. And the sperm whales dive down hunting these in the canyon, in the deep water canyons along that part of the New Zealand coastline. Another one of my favourites, but one which I've never managed to photograph successfully, is a dugong. That is my photograph of a dugong in Australia. That is a very clever photographer's photograph of a dugong in Australia. And I think they are amazing animals, sea cows. Great, and they graze on seagrasses, and they are followed by these little fish which feed on all the invertebrates that they disturb as they graze on the seagrasses. And of course, there are the fish in the open ocean, so many different varieties, and they provide the world's population with extremely important source of protein, whether you like fish and chips, as we do in the UK, or barracuda, or whatever you fancy. They are a hugely important food source and an overexploited one at the moment. From the large things out in the open ocean, we're going to move now to the tiny things, to the plankton, the animal plankton. And majority of bottom living animals in the ocean release tiny mobile plankton that drift. The larvae drift in the plankton. And if you look at the bottom right, that is the larval plankton of a starfish. And then bottom left, that beautifully adapted to floating existence is the larva of a heavy bottom living spiny lobster. Top left is the larva of a crab, and top right is the larva of a marine worm. So that's the way that many bottom living animals actually start their lives, is as animals floating in the plankton, larvae floating in the plankton. Even smaller and equally, in fact, more important, are the plant plankton. And if you take a deep breath now, and then another one, skip one breath, take another breath, every other breath you are taking is probably being produced by plankton in the ocean, because they produce something like 50% of oxygen in the air we breathe. And of course, they are the whole basis of the ocean food chain as well. Not just plants, but plants and true plants and many other photosynthetic marine organisms, which are not all true plants. So the plant plankton is extremely important. The larger plankton, the jellyfish and so on, are perhaps more familiar. And this is the moon jellyfish, very common the world over, taken in an aquarium. And you can therefore see the radial channels leading from the mouth on the underside and supplying food all around the body. This one you probably would want to be a bit more wary of. It's a box jellyfish. I very nearly jumped in on top of one in Malaysia one year, but luckily saw it in time. And of course, they are extremely venomous, one of the most venomous animals in the ocean. But they're also extremely well developed in that they have eyes that have basic rudimentary lenses, and they can actually navigate their way in things like mangrove forests and so on. And another one of my favorites, the lion's mane jellyfish, which has a very potent sting. You find them around UK, and they can have tentacles 15 meters long, so you don't even see what you've been stung by. So I moved through that fairly quickly because we're a little behind, and we'll move on to the sublittoral, the shallow seabed. Now this covers a multitude of sins, everything from coral reefs, kelp forests, seagrass beds, rocky reefs, sand and mud, and of course in the Antarctic and Arctic, the icy wastes. So I've just picked out a couple of examples, and I may have to skip one of them, we'll see. The coral reefs and the seagrass beds. And we'll start with some coral. If you want to see a coral reef properly, you need to take yourself down there in scuba gear, albeit you can see quite a lot by snorkeling. But put on the scuba tanks, all that heavy equipment, and you'll be able to see a great deal more. The fish don't need to bother with all this. I've got on, in that picture, I've got an adjustable buoyancy life jacket on. I can feed air in and out of it, and I've got fins and so on, and I can adjust my weight that way. The fish have an inbuilt bladder, an air bladder called a swim bladder, and they can do exactly the same thing, but in a physiological sense, in that they push gas in and out of this bladder to adjust their buoyancy according to their depth. So they just do it naturally. First thing you might notice as you go down with your tank is that the water looks, as you go deeper, starts to look very blue, and the animals start to look very blue. And now that fish, which is a tropical fish whose name I'm just about to forget for the second, is that colour in reality, lionfish. So that's taken without any inputted light, so that's natural light going down to about 10 meters. That is using a torch and a flash camera, and that is the true colour. So what's happening here? It's all to do with the colours of the light, of the sunlight. And if you look at a natural rainbow, we think of those as different colours, they're different wavelengths, and the red end of the spectrum, the wavelengths, are absorbed first by the ocean. So by about 10 meters, there is no red light, and you cannot see red as a colour. Hence, it starting to all appear blue and green and even black as you get deeper. I proved that one day by getting bitten by one of these, which is a moray eel, which shot out of a reef, bit my thumb thoroughly and disappeared again. And my blood not only went up instead of down because the currents were going up, but it was blue like royalty. It really did look blue underwater. The reefs I've studied most have been out in Malaysia, again in Borneo, Sabah, a place called the Semporna Islands, now achieved marine park status as the Tun Sekaran Marine Park. And the work we were doing there, most of it about 15 to 20 years ago, we were staying in a very primitive, dilapidated pearl farm. And around there isn't very much in the way of habitation, apart from the pearl farm itself and these native people that we tend to call they're called the Bajau Laut, which is a lovely name, but it really just means people who live in boats, and they build temporary shelters, but a lot of the time they live actually on their boats. And this is a few of the children, although they're probably all grown up now, these ones. But I particularly love the make-do sun cream that they use, made out of some sort of mud and cream of some sort. We were staying, as I say, on this old pearl farm in this luxurious accommodation before the main marine park headquarters was built in more recent years. And it was great. We even had an ensuite toilet, as you can see. We did have to walk the plank to get to it, but when you got there, it had a sea view. The corals are obviously the most important part of the coral reef, and we were there to study the variety of the corals and of the fish, and also to see what state the reefs were in. Now remember, this is some years ago now, and it was really very, very upsetting because large parts of the reefs had been bombed. This is a bomb crater. They toss homemade bombs into the water, and unfortunately it breaks up all the coral and it gains them a few fish because the fish are stunned and float to the surface and they can collect the fish. This is a big problem in many tropical countries, and it's an ongoing problem, albeit it's this particular area we've now got it a bit better under control, but it's a huge problem. And it's understandable because some of these people are extremely poor and they have no other way of getting sufficient to eat in some cases. I'm going to skip over a little bit of this coral because we're getting a bit late, but I will just say that we've got each coral is a colony, and it consists of these tiny little polyps, which are individuals, but they're all connected throughout the colony. And they have this hard skeleton in which they sit. It's not inside them, they sit in it. And so they sit on it, and each little polyp sits in a little tiny cup. You can probably see that from this, because this coral's been eaten by a crown of thorns starfish, and so only the skeleton remains. And you can just about see the little pits in it in which these coral polyps once lived. One of my favourite corals, called it's called fungia, and this is an unusual coral because this particular one can actually walk. Now, most corals are obviously fixed thoroughly to the seabed and they can't move about. These are fixed when they're young, and then the stalk breaks off and they can actually walk using their tentacles, just short distances, which for a coral is kind of unusual. Fish are a mainstay of coral reefs, of course, and I'm just going to show you a few of my very favourites. That is my favourite. Now, you wouldn't even think that was a fish. This is a frogfish, for perhaps obvious reasons. And you can just about see the mouth at the top end and the eye with that sort of teardrop stain coming down from it. And then the fins look like feet, and they're adapted to allow it to sort of crawl around on the rocks. So fish aren't just fish-shaped or look like fish, they are amazingly adaptable. This is its big brother, mouth and eyes shown by the arrows, hanging upside down under a rock. And then there are the colourful ones, the show-offs. Again, another of my favourites, the surgeon fish. And right at the base there near the tail, you can maybe see a yellow streak, and that's a flick knife. And when they want to protect themselves or protect their territories, they can literally flick out their knife sideways and slash with their tail at either their enemies or their competitors on the reef. There's the knife. Others protect themselves by hiding away under the coral at night time. This is a parrotfish, and what it's done is it's secreted a jelly bag, like a sleeping bag of mucus, to protect it at night, both from so that its smell doesn't escape and it can't be found by predators, and to stop parasites from attaching themselves to it whilst it's asleep at night. That's its big brother, the bumphead the bumphead parrotfish, which is up to 1 metre long. And you can see that great beak that chews up the coral and spits it out spits the skeleton out at both ends, actually, making coral sand. Many other things live in and on the coral. This is a tiny little Christmas tree worm that has a burrow within the coral, and as soon as you approach it, it can just shoot straight back into the burrow so that it's safe from predators. Now, the second habitat I was going to go through, but it will have to be fairly brief, is the seagrass. So we'll have a quick look. Seagrass is an extremely important habitat in UK and many other countries, and it has a structure and a function quite like grasslands on land, really. So you've got the structure of the seagrass, you've got things growing on it, and you've got things crawling around and swimming under it and feeding in amongst the fronds. And it itself makes a huge amount of detritus, and the detritus feeds a huge number of other animals. It's an extremely good system in terms of the amount of production it has. And it also supports beautiful animals like this tiny little short-snouted seahorse, which is one of a UK species. This is its big brother, the Australian one. I absolutely love this animal. Its colour and its long nose and its general demeanour are quite astonishing. So that's one of your Australian seahorses. Seagrasses live all round in temperate and tropical waters, not in the Arctic or Antarctic, and there's about 60 species. And you can see the flowers here in one I collected from Malaysia. And you can see the roots on the left, you can see the rhizomes, you can see the leaves, and above it, a young fruit on the left and an older fruit on the right. And the coiled up stem of those is a brilliant way of gradually reaching to the surface where it can disperse its seeds and pollen. Seagrass is extremely important because they absorb and store carbon dioxide. And that's obviously very topical at the moment. And they are better at that than even a tropical rainforest. And there are huge attempts at the moment in the UK and elsewhere to recreate and improve seagrass beds, which have gone down hugely in extent in the last years, since about 2030. And we've just got time now to dive down very briefly into the deep ocean. But for that, we're going to need a submarine. So I've chosen the Alvin for our little journey down, which is one of the oldest, longest ones that have been in existence for the longest, albeit there's a new model now. It's not the same machine. We need it because if we didn't, we'd look like that cup on the right as we go down. Pressure increases by 1 whole atmosphere or bar for every 10 meters that you go down. So at the surface, you have 1 atmosphere, which is simply the atmosphere pressing down. And by 1500 meters, you've got 150 plus that 151 atmospheres pressing down on you. And anything with gas in it, like this polystyrene cup, will be crushed to smithereens. So you do need a submersible. And we'll start up at the surface in the light, and we'll go down, and we'll get darker, and we'll go down a bit more, and we'll get darker still, and we'll go down a bit more, and we'll get darker still until it's absolutely black. But is it? We're going to get used to the blackness, turn off the submersible lights, and suddenly appearing around us are bioluminescent shapes. I think these are absolutely astonishing. Bioluminescent fish, bioluminescent squid, and also, if you don't want to show up, red jellyfish, because red as a colour, as we learned earlier, it can't be seen in the dark depths. The bioluminescence is used for communication, for catching your food, and practically everything else that you might do by signalling in light is done when, you know, in the surface where you might have colours and shapes, is done by signals using light, bioluminescent light in the depths. Those eyes on the left, those mysterious eyes on the left, are these spotlight fish or flashlight fish. And they actually have a pouch under their eye containing bioluminescent bacteria. And the bacteria produce the light, and they have eyelids, which the fish have eyelids or pouch lids, which they can shut this light on and off with. So they can signal like an Aldous lamp by exposing or covering up the bacteria. Quite astonishing. Some of them use a bioluminescent lure, like this anglerfish, to actually attract other animals, smaller fish and other animals, within reach of their teeth, and then they will swallow these fish down in the depths. This isn't as bad as it looks. It's actually only about 4 centimeters long, but they are ferocious looking. Down on the seabed itself, you've got some quite extraordinary animals. This is actually a mollusk, a clam, that acts very much like a Venus flytrap plant on land. It literally shuts up when anything edible lands on it. You've got basket stars, which are like complicated starfish. And you've got all the animals of the deep sea vents, the hot thermal vents down on the seabed. And I actually remember when these were discovered back in the early 1970s, and the astonishment that it caused, that picture on the left, all those red things with white tubes are these huge tube worms, one of the first animals to be found living in these extraordinary conditions down on the hydrothermal vents. And my favourite, perhaps, of all the animals that live there, the yeti crab. You can see why it's called a yeti crab. And they are believed to farm bacteria on their hairs of their arms and to live partially by catching prey and partially by farming and eating the bacteria on their hairs. Right, so that really completes our journey. I'm going to leave out the next few slides, which were simply about how I actually wrote the book, because we don't really have the time to do it. And I'm going to move on to that strange sandcastle that we found. Right, there's quite a few. I might come back to him, we'll see. Right, so there's the sandcastle. So as a reminder to see what it is. I think that I haven't time to go back to that other one. So if you, I believe there are a lot of chats in here, am I right, that may have told us what this is. And so, oh, whoops, giving it away now, haven't I? Did anybody guess that it was a fish? I can't see you, of course, but I'm assuming that.
So we had a couple of guesses. So we had pufferfish,
Right.
toadfish, starfish, male pufferfish, fish, Torcugener flavimi macalosis, I think is what it says.
Right.
My glasses are a little bit rubbish. White spotted pufferfish.
Right.
Like some kind of worms on the top. Sea cucumber. And we've got the Torcugener albumaculosus again. Sea slug.
Brilliant.
Let's see. And I think we're back to, we've got seagrass, pufferfish. Yeah. So
right. Well, you are anybody who said pufferfish, well done. It's actually a Japanese pufferfish. I haven't looked up the scientific name of it, and it's only really a few inches long. And I think it's absolutely stunning that a little fish like that can build something with such mathematical precision just to attract a mate. And as soon as he's got a mate in there, and it's the man or the male that's building this, as soon as he's got his mate in there and she's laid her eggs, he doesn't care about his beautiful sandcastle anymore, because it's done its job. It's attracted his female in. And I think it's quite astonishing that something could be built like that. They were all brilliant guesses, by the way, because a lot of the other animals mentioned do build some sort of heap of sand or other. So that really, as far as I'm concerned, is it. And I thought we'd end with that slide because it connects the ocean, the land and the air together with the animals that move between them, like this albatross. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francis. That was absolutely fascinating. What an amazing kind of collection of animals and plants you've introduced us to. It's just just kind of some of the forms are almost unreal. They are so incredible. And I mean, people have popped in what amazing photographs and a really wonderful presentation and really engaged people. So thank you so much. There was I think there were a couple of comments, but I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what's been happening with the seagrass beds. How have they kind of deteriorated so badly, and what's the kind of plan for moving forward with those, because they're obviously really important.
Okay, well, in the UK, certainly, one of the major problems was the 1930s. There was a disease which wiped out a large part of the population of them. And unfortunately, they never really recovered, because in the following years, you've got pollution, you've got darker water, sediment in the water, so they can't thrive, and disturbance from boat anchors. All these things actually means that the seabeds have not, the seagrass beds have not actually recovered. There are lots of projects ongoing to actually plant seeds in special little sacks or individual plants to repair damaged seagrass beds. And there are plans around various areas to try and improve the water quality, simply so that the seagrass can recover itself.
So yeah, let's hope that those can kind of, you know, all have an impact, because I know sometimes you have the issue about you planting, but actually because the conditions aren't right, what you plant, it doesn't thrive. So it's about getting not just, so it's not just about adding them in, but actually, you know, making sure that the environment is right for them.
Exactly, yes, exactly.
Thank you. I can see a lot of nice comments coming through about what a wonderful talk, one of the best presentations they've seen, and somebody has inspired them to get their scuba gear on. Excellent. Sounds great as well. And so, yeah, so somebody says first LNHS talk has been great. Anka, did you pick up any actual questions for Francis in the chat?
No, actually there weren't any. There were some general comments about seagrass and the importance of seagrass as carbon sequestrian. Obviously lots of guesses about who made the sandcastle, but and lots of compliments, but no questions.
That's
wait
all right.
a second. I don't quite understand the question. There is hold on. What caused this to seagrass beds? I'm not sure.
Well, I think that probably just the previous question, isn't it? Really, what was the cause of the damage? I would imagine that would be.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of kind of the damage to the seagrass beds, because I know last year in the summer, and this is an ongoing problem, there was quite a lot of pollution coming out of the rivers and from water companies being spewed into the ocean, into the seas. So that would also clearly have an impact on any fledgling seagrass beds.
That most certainly is one of the problems in the UK that's finally being flagged up. The fact that we have so much sewage, raw sewage going into the rivers when you get the storm drains coming into operation, and that's causing obviously sedimentation like that and pollution in terms of even of human illness. From some of the sewage. So it's something that has to be tackled in this country. I mean, it's very much better than it was when I was a child, and you could walk along the beach and see all sorts of unmentionable things, but it's still not perfect by any means. They've got to stop this overflow business. So yes, you're right, absolutely.
Did you see someone just popped in a question about how much of the ocean is still undiscovered? So how much has actually been explored and how much is sort of still left?
That is a lovely question, especially since I don't know the answer. But basically, you could say that undoubtedly, I should say 90% is not discovered simply because of the deep ocean. So the deep ocean is the largest habitat in the whole of the marine world. And we've explored only a tiny fraction of it. There's still a humongous amount of stuff to be discovered, and some estimates of how many animals and plants we might discover in the sea, it goes into millions, but you know, obviously they're only just guesses really. But yes, don't worry, there's plenty out there for all of you to discover, and you can discover new species on the shore. It happens all the time in UK. So anything unusual, take a photograph, send it in to perhaps the Marine Conservation Society or something, and you may get your answer.
I mean, that's just a kind of good point, really. Just say, you know, this is all open for people who, obviously some people who can dive, but I mean, even people who are just able to kind of walk around and look at what's in the rocky pools, what's growing, what is on the seashore. There's, you know, definitely opportunities for things to be recorded and, you know, for new discoveries to be made. You mentioned a couple of organisations. Do you want to just kind of flag those up, what they were?
Yep, I'll do that. There's obviously there's the UK's Marine Conservation Society, mainly concerned with conservation rather than surveys. There are one of the societies I helped to found and run is something called the Porcupine Marine Natural History Society, and that's a small society, about 200 people, everything from general public, students through to professors of marine biology. And they run a conference every year, and they run a field trip every year, and they run some local trips, rather like you do in many ways. And there are an awful lot of local groups run by the wildlife trusts. So if you live in, say, Devon or Cornwall, I know they've got individual marine projects that you can join in. There's many of them.
So obviously that's, you know, something to follow up, you know, particularly because obviously people can explore by themselves, but it's really nice sometimes to kind of have an organisation and to kind of work
exactly
together.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so we're going to sort of, I think, wrap things up now. And we just had a message in the chat for somebody whose mum's told them this, they have to go to bed because it's getting late. So it's quite sweet. But they really enjoyed the lecture. But mum says it's, you know, when my mum says it's bedtime, it is bedtime. So thank you so much, Frances, for a really lovely presentation. I expect you can see in the chat all the kind of really nice messages about people saying how great they are. And as I said, I know a couple of people didn't arrive till late, but we have recorded the session and we will pop it up onto our YouTube channel. So you'll be able, yeah, as Anka said, you'll be able to watch the whole thing. If people would like to unmute themselves and to express their appreciation as they go, that you're most welcome to do that. Our next talk is in May and it will be, let me just check the date, on the 11th of May, so Thursday the 11th of May, and that's going to be a talk about Hainault Forest by two of the wardens, Izzy and Eva, who work there. So please do join us, book a place and come along if you're interested in that as well, and look out for the recording of this talk, which will get up in there next week or so. Thank you very much for coming along. We hope to see you all again very soon.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
That was terrific. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Yep,
Thank
great.
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oops, stop recording. It stopped.